The desert road stretched endlessly ahead of me, a ribbon of sun-baked asphalt winding through rust-colored mesas and hills that seemed older than time. The air smelled of dust and sagebrush, and the sun hung heavy in the sky, beating down on my old Jeep like it wanted to melt the paint clean off. I wasn't even supposed to be out here. My original plan was to follow an old mining trail for a piece I was writing, but a wrong turn and a half-dead GPS landed me somewhere completely different. That's when I saw it, a hand-painted wooden sign, half-fallen and bleached white by the sun, leaning crookedly by the side of the road. It read, Ravens Hollow, 6 miles. I nearly drove past it. It wasn't on any map I had, and towns that small rarely had much to offer a travel writer. But something about the name stuck with me. Maybe it was the way the word hollow tugged at some buried part of my imagination, the part that loved old ghost stories and half-forgotten legends. I figured I could spare a quick detour. The road narrowed to dirt and gravel, winding down into a canyon so steep I couldn't see the bottom. The rock walls loomed on either side like jagged sentinels. My tires kicked up a cloud of red dust behind me, and the sun dipped lower, casting the whole canyon in shadows. For a moment, I felt like I was driving into the mouth of something ancient and hungry. And then, just as suddenly, the canyon widened, and there it was. Ravens Hollow looked like it had been carved out of the canyon itself. The houses weren't made from wood or brick, but from stone, blending so seamlessly into the red rock that they seemed to grow from it. Each house had a flat roof and narrow windows, with old wooden doors that looked hand-carved. Some had wind chimes hanging from the eaves, made of bone and driftwood, tinkling softly in the breeze. I pulled the Jeep to a stop at what looked like the edge of town. There were no paved roads, just packed dirt paths winding between the buildings. A few people were moving around, a woman hanging laundry on a line strung between 2 sagging poles, an older man sitting on a weathered porch, whittling something with a small knife. They glanced at me, but didn't wave. No curiosity. No hostility, just quiet acknowledgement. A man emerged from one of the stone houses and walked toward me. He looked like he belonged to the desert, lean and weathered, his skin darkened by years of sun. He wore a faded flannel shirt with the sleeves rolled up and old jeans, the kind that were patched and repatched until the original fabric was a memory. His hair was iron gray, tied back at the nape of his neck, and his face was lined, though his eyes were sharp and steady. Lost? He asked, his voice low and rough. Not sure anymore, I admitted. I was following an old mining trail. Took a wrong turn. He didn't smile, but his expression softened a little. Not many folks end up here by accident. I introduced myself, told him I was a writer. His eyes narrowed slightly at that, like he wasn't sure if he believed me or not. Finally, he nodded. Elias Boone, he said, offering a rough, calloused hand. I guess you'll want a place to stay. I hadn't thought that far ahead. I still wasn't even sure what I'd found. But something about the place tugged at me. It didn't feel like any town I'd ever been to. It felt older, quieter, like it had been forgotten by the world, and liked it that way. Elias led me to a small stone house near the edge of the village. It was empty, but clean. The furniture was handmade, a sturdy wooden bed, a small table, a chair. A woven blanket lay neatly folded at the foot of the bed, the colors faded but still vibrant. Deep red, sun gold, and midnight blue. Festivals tonight, Elias said, almost as an afterthought. Sky Kings are watching. I blinked. Sky Kings. He glanced at the sky, where I noticed for the first time a dark shape wheeling overhead. A bird, no, a massive bird, circling lazily on the wind. Another joined it, then another. Their wings were enormous, stretching out like shadows against the sun. Condors, Elias said quietly. But they're more than that. Sky Kings. Guardians of the Hollow. I stared up at the birds, feeling a strange weight settle in my chest. They weren't like any birds I'd ever seen. There was something regal, almost ancient, about the way they moved, silent and slow, like they owned the sky. Elias turned to go, pausing at the door. You're welcome to stay. But don't miss the festival. You came all this way. Might as well see what we're about. And with that, he was gone. I stood in the quiet little house, listening to the wind outside, and watched the condors circle above the canyon. The sun was starting to set, painting the sky in streaks of fire and indigo. The birds looked like black silhouettes against the flame-colored sky. I should have felt uneasy, standing alone in an unfamiliar village, surrounded by strangers and ancient stone. But I didn't. For the first time in a long time, I felt like I was exactly where I was supposed to be. The sun dipped below the canyon walls faster than I expected, leaving Raven's Hollow bathed in twilight. The sky, once a blazing orange, had deepened to a dusky purple, and the first stars flickered to life. The air cooled quickly, losing the desert's punishing heat, replaced by a chill that settled into my skin. The village had changed, too. Where before it was quiet, almost sleepy, now it buzzed with a low, steady energy. People moved through the narrow dirt paths, their faces painted with streaks of white and ochre. Their clothes, once practical and dusty, were now adorned with feathers and beads. Wind chimes swayed and clattered in the evening breeze, a haunting, melodic sound that never quite resolved into a tune. I followed the sound of drums, low, slow, and steady, like a heartbeat. They led me to the center of the village, where a wide clearing stretched out beneath the canyon's tallest walls. A fire burned in a massive stone pit, flames licking hungrily at the sky, casting flickering shadows across the gathered crowd. Elias was there, standing near the fire. His face was painted now, too, the same white and ochre streaks running down his weathered skin. He looked older in the firelight, like he belonged to another century. A carved wooden staff, wrapped in black feathers, rested in his hand. "Didn't think you'd show," he said without turning to face me. I stepped closer, the heat of the fire warming my face. "Didn't think I'd get an invitation." Elias huffed out a quiet laugh. "Everyone's invited. The Sky Kings don't discriminate." Before I could ask what that meant, the drums shifted, picking up speed. The villagers formed a wide circle around the fire. Children sat cross-legged near the front, their eyes wide and eager. The adults stood behind them, somber but expectant. The air felt heavier somehow, like the canyon itself was holding its breath. A woman stepped forward from the crowd. She was tall and lean, with a cascade of silver hair tied back in a thick braid. Her dress was simple, but a collar of raven feathers fanned out around her shoulders. Her eyes were sharp and clear, and they landed on me for a moment before flicking away. "Sky Kings," she called out, her voice strong and steady. "We honor you." The crowd echoed her words. "We honor you. We remember your sacrifice. We remember your sacrifice. We ask for your protection. We ask for your protection." The moment she finished, the drum stopped, cut off so abruptly it left my ears ringing. The silence was deafening, broken only by the crackle of the fire. Then I heard it. Wings. A heavy, rhythmic whoosh 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 filled the air, and the villagers' heads tilted up in unison. I followed their gaze. The condors were descending. They came one by one, black shadows against the starry sky. Their wingspans were enormous. I swear some were close to 10 feet, and they glided down silently, landing on the stone ledges that jutted from the canyon walls. There were dozens of them, watching us with dark, unblinking eyes. A hush fell over the crowd, and the woman in feathers stepped forward again. She raised both hands, palms up, and began to speak in a low, melodic chant. The language wasn't one I recognized. It sounded old, older than Spanish or English or anything I'd heard before. The villagers joined her, their voices rising and falling together like the wind. I felt something then. A shift in the air. The hairs on my arms stood up, and a cold prickle ran down my spine. The flames flickered and danced, casting strange shapes on the canyon walls. The condors didn't move, didn't blink. They just stared. Suddenly, the chanting stopped. The woman lowered her hands, and the villagers fell silent. For a heartbeat, nothing happened. The fire crackled. The wind sighed. Then one of the condors moved. It launched from the ledge, massive wings unfolding with a powerful whoosh. It glided down, slow and deliberate, and landed in the center of the clearing, just feet from the fire. The crowd murmured, not in fear, but reverence. Elias stepped forward. He knelt, bowing his head. The condor tilted its head to one side, watching him with eyes that seemed too intelligent for any bird. After a moment, Elias rose and reached into his pocket. He pulled out something small and metallic. It caught the firelight, a locket, old and tarnished. He placed it gently on the ground before the bird, then stepped back. The condor let out a low, rumbling sound. Not quite a caw, not quite a growl. It picked up the locket in its beak, held it for a moment, then spread its wings wide. The wind hit me like a wave, strong and sudden, and I had to shield my eyes. When I looked again, the condor was gone, soaring back to the canyon walls. The other birds followed one by one, disappearing into the night. The villagers exhaled as one. I hadn't realized I was holding my breath too. Elias turned to me, his face unreadable. They accepted the offering. We're safe for another year. His words hung in the air, but they didn't settle right. The way he said it, not with relief, but resignation, left a knot in my stomach. As the villagers began to disperse, their voices low and relieved, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was coming. Something the Sky Kings couldn't stop. The village was quiet again by the time I made it back to the little stone house Elias had given me. The air felt different now, heavier, charged with something I couldn't name. It wasn't fear, not exactly. More like a weight pressing down on the world, like the night itself was watching. I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the condors, those massive, silent guardians staring down at us from the canyon walls. Elias's words echoed in my head. They accepted the offering. We're safe for another year. Safe from what? The fire had burned low when I wandered back outside. The wind had died, leaving the night deathly still. The only sound was the distant call of an owl, somewhere high up on the cliffs. The moonlight painted the village in shades of silver and shadow. I wasn't sure where I was going, only that I couldn't stay still. My feet carried me down one of the narrow dirt paths, past houses with shuttered windows and doors drawn tight. The village felt abandoned now, like the people inside were holding their breath. I found myself near the canyon's edge, where the ground fell away into darkness. The rock walls loomed overhead, jagged and monolithic. The moon cast long shadows down the cliff face, and I saw movement high above, a flicker of wings. The condors were still there, circling slowly, soundlessly. Then I heard it. A voice, barely more than a whisper, carried on the breeze. Help me. I froze. It wasn't the wind. I knew the difference. The voice was too human, too raw. I turned, scanning the darkness, but there was no one there. Please help me. It came again, clear this time from somewhere down the path ahead. My heart hammered against my ribs. Every instinct I had screamed at me to turn back, to go back to the house, to sleep, to forget. But I didn't. I followed the sound. The path twisted and narrowed, hugging the canyon's edge. Loose stones crunched under my boots. The voice grew louder, more desperate. Please, they won't let me go. The path ended at a narrow, crumbling ledge. Below, the canyon yawned wide and deep. The moonlight barely touched the bottom. I leaned forward trying to see. That's when I saw her. She stood on a lower ledge, half hidden in shadow. A girl, no older than 16, with tangled dark hair and a torn dress. Her face was pale, too pale, and her eyes were wide with something between fear and exhaustion. Help me, she whispered again. They won't let me leave. My voice caught in my throat. Who won't? She glanced upward, past me, toward the cliffs. I followed her gaze. The condors were gone. The sky was empty, the stars cold and distant. The only sound was the wind picking up again, stirring the dust at my feet. I looked back at the girl. She stared at me with those hollow eyes. Please. They're coming back. I didn't think. I climbed down. The rocks were loose and sharp, scraping my hands, but I didn't care. I couldn't leave her down there. The moment my boots hit the ledge, the wind died again. The silence was deafening. "Okay," I said, breathing hard. "Let's get you out of here." She didn't move. Her eyes flicked past me, and her face crumpled into terror. "No," she whispered. "They're here." A shadow fell over us. I looked up just in time to see something enormous swoop down from the cliffs. Not a condor, but something else. Bigger. Its wings were tattered, edges frayed like old cloth, and its body was wrong. Too thin, too angular. It didn't glide, it plunged. I grabbed the girl's wrist and yanked her toward me. She stumbled, but I didn't let go. I scrambled back toward the cliff face, searching for a way up, but the ledge was too narrow. There was nowhere to go. The thing hit the ground behind us with a bone-jarring thud. Dust and loose stones scattered. My throat tightened as I dared a glance. It wasn't a bird. It looked like one. Wings, feathers, a hooked beak, but its eyes were all wrong. They were too large, too bright, glowing faintly in the dark. It tilted its head at me, curious. It smelled like rust and old earth. The girl squeezed my hand. "Don't let go," she begged. I didn't. The thing stepped forward, claws scraping against the rock. Its head twitched, fast and unnatural, like a puppet on broken strings. It made a sound then, low and guttural, almost like a growl, but wet, too, like something trying to speak through a throat full of water. I braced myself. There was nowhere to run. Then I heard it, the wings. This time, it was the condors. They came from above, silent shadows slicing through the night. One, then two, then a dozen. They didn't cry out. They didn't scream. They just dove, black shapes against the stars. The thing turned toward them, hissing. It tried to leap, but the first condor hit it midair, knocking it back to the ledge with a sickening crunch. The other birds swarmed it. Feathers and wings and claws, a black whirlwind. The thing screeched, a high, piercing sound that cut through me like a knife, and then it was gone, dragged off the ledge and into the canyon below. The silence that followed was absolute. I couldn't move. My legs felt like lead. The girl's hand was still in mine, trembling. After what felt like an eternity, she spoke, her voice barely a whisper. "They're not just guardians," she said. "They're hunters, too." I didn't have an answer. The only thing I knew for certain, standing there on that ledge with the wind in my hair and the moonlight on my skin, was that Raven's Hollow wasn't a place you stumbled onto by accident. It was a place you were brought to, and not everyone was meant to leave. The girl and I didn't speak as we climbed back up the rocky ledge. My hands were raw, my legs burned, but fear kept me moving. The village lights flickered faintly in the distance. They felt a world away. The condors had disappeared again, leaving only the wind behind. I glanced at the girl as we reached the top. She was trembling, her eyes darting to the sky every few seconds. "What's your name?" I asked, my voice hoarse. "Clara," she whispered. "Clara Mason." The name hit me like a brick to the chest. Mason. The same last name as the family from the cemetery, the ones Elias told me had been lost to the canyon. I didn't ask her more, not yet. My heart pounded too hard for that. We made it back to the village without seeing another soul. The streets were still and silent. Even the wind chimes had stopped, swaying lifelessly. The fire pit in the center had burned out, leaving only faint red embers. Elias was waiting on my porch. His face was lined with shadows, his expression unreadable. He didn't look surprised to see the girl. "I figured you'd find her," he said quietly. "You're stubborn like that." I swallowed hard. She said they wouldn't let her go. Elias sighed, standing slowly. "They didn't. She's not supposed to be here." Clara's hand tightened on mine. "Please," she said, voice barely audible. "I just want to go home." Elias didn't answer right away. He looked past us, up to the cliffs where the condors had roost. The sky was empty now, just a blanket of stars. When he spoke, his voice was low and rough. "There's a reason Raven's Hollow doesn't show up on maps," he said. "A reason the old families stay, and the outsiders don't." He met my eyes. "The Sky Kings demand balance." "Balance," I echoed, my voice shaking. What kind of balance? He didn't blink. A life for a life. The weight of his words crashed over me, ice cold and final. I looked at Clara, my throat tightening. She's just a kid. Elias didn't flinch. The canyon doesn't care. Her family broke the balance when they tried to leave. The Sky Kings took them. All but her. They weren't supposed to let her survive. That thing tonight, it came to finish what they started. Clara's voice was barely a whisper. Please don't let them take me. I took a shaky breath. There's gotta be another way. Elias watched me for a long moment. Then slowly he nodded. Maybe there is. But it's not one you'll like. I didn't hesitate. Tell me. He glanced at Clara again. His voice dropped to almost a whisper. They'll accept a trade. The words hit like a punch to the gut. My stomach twisted. A trade. I repeated, numb. Someone else for her? Elias didn't answer. He didn't have to. I felt Clara's hand tremble in mine. She didn't speak, didn't argue. I think she already knew. My mind raced. There were a dozen people in that village I didn't know. Strangers. People I'd barely seen. But the idea made bile rise in my throat. I couldn't do that. Not to them. Not to anyone. And then the truth settled over me like a weight too heavy to hold. There was only one life I could offer. Mine. I met Elias's eyes. Will they take me instead? His face didn't change. They might. Might wasn't a guarantee. But it was enough. I let go of Clara's hand gently. Run, I said softly. Don't stop until you're far from here. Her eyes filled with tears. No, she breathed. You can't. Go, I said, more firmly this time. Please. She didn't want to. But something in my voice must have convinced her. She stared at me for a moment longer, then turned and ran. Her footsteps echoed in the stillness, faster and faster, until they faded into nothing. I turned back to Elias. He didn't look away. What now? I asked, my voice steady despite the fear coiling in my chest. He sighed again, shoulders slumping like a man carrying the weight of the world. You go to the canyon's edge. And you wait. So I did. The walk felt longer this time, though it was the same path. My legs felt heavier, my breath tighter. The night was quiet. Too quiet. When I reached the edge, the wind stirred again, cold against my face. The canyon stretched below me, endless and dark. I waited. It didn't take long. The wings came first, a low, rhythmic whoosh whoosh whoosh. The condors descended one by one, black shapes blotting out the stars. They landed on the cliffs, silent and watching. Then the last one came. It wasn't a condor. The thing from before emerged from the shadows, its glowing eyes burning into me. It moved differently now, slower, almost deliberate, like it knew what I was offering. I swallowed the fear rising in my throat and stepped forward. Take me, I said, my voice steady. Let her go. The thing tilted its head, studying me. For a moment, nothing happened. The wind died. The world held its breath. Then it lunged. I didn't flinch. The darkness hit me like a wave, swallowing the world whole. And then, nothing. I woke up to sunlight. Warmth on my face. The sound of birds, normal birds, singing somewhere nearby. I was lying on the ground near the canyon's edge, my head pounding. I was alive. I sat up slowly, my throat dry, my muscles aching. The canyon was empty. The condors were gone. The village was quiet in the distance, but smoke rose from chimneys. Life went on. I didn't know why they let me go. Maybe the Sky Kings found me worthy. Maybe they pitied me. Maybe they just wanted to remind me they could have taken me any time they wanted. All I knew was Clara was gone. Safe, I hoped. Elias found me later that day. He didn't say anything. He didn't need to. We just sat there in the sunlight, staring at the empty sky, and listened to the wind.